Today we are starting a new series called Fresh Baked Crimes. We are starting this series off with a well-known TikToker known as Jin Kid. Ali, who was known on TikTok as Jin Kid, was living a double life. He was married to wife Anna and had a 5-year-old daughter. In September, there was a domestic violence case where Ali pushed Anna and caused her harm in front of their daughter. Anna ended up filing a restraining order and a divorce. Ali moved out, but not before making a copy of the apartment key. On October 21st, he returned to the apartment and trashed it. He then placed a listening device on his daughter's iPad. When Anna and her friend Rayburn returned to the apartment, they did not call the cops. When Ali returned to the hotel, he heard his wife laughing and talking with her friend through the listening device. His first thought was that she was cheating on him. He ended up grabbing a loaded gun and heading to the apartment. Ali shot his wife Anna and her friend Rayburn and then headed to go get his daughter from school. He told his daughter that he hurt mommy, and he proceeded to call his own mother and confess to what he just did. He then called the police just after 3 p.m. and was pulled over and detained on Interstate 805, all while his daughter was in the car. At Ali's hearing, he was caught crying when they were talking about what happened. But according to Ali's cousins, he doesn't buy into his emotions. He said it was an act, and Ali is an emotionless person, and that fame created a monster. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. If convicted, he could face the death penalty, but for now, he remains in custody without bail. Welcome back to Fresh Baked Crimes. Today we are talking about the case of Gretchen Anthony. Gretchen and David got married in 2015 and soon later had a daughter. However, their relationship started to change. David had very unpredictable mood swings, and in spring of 2017, he suffered a traumatic brain injury. This is when his behavior began to get even worse. In the fall of 2019, the couple separated, and David moved in with his mom, who lived nearby. As we know, of March 2020, COVID hit and everybody was isolating. However, on March 23rd, Gretchen's friends and family were very concerned by the text they were getting from her. The text said that she had COVID and she was so ill she needed to be on a ventilator. Her friends and family were alarmed enough that they contacted the cops. They immediately began looking for David Anthony, who, of course, was unable to be found. It turns out that David had actually changed his name and had been hiding a secret past. David made his way to Florida, where he then called the police and told them that Gretchen was fine and she was with him. Security cameras captured David assaulting Gretchen in her own house the day that she went missing. David finally told law enforcement where Gretchen was buried, and he was then sentenced to 38 years in prison. An autopsy was done on Gretchen's body, and it turns out she had been stabbed multiple times by David. He then tried to hide his wife's disappearance by sending texts from her cell phone pretending to be her. That is the case of Gretchen Anthony. Welcome back to Fresh Baked Crimes. Today we are talking about the case of Candace Rogers. On March 6, 1959, Candace was just 9 years old. She was out selling campfire mints for her Girl Scout troop. She would never return home after this. The days following her disappearance, approximately 1,200 volunteers gathered to find the missing girl. About 2 weeks later, on March 21st, they found Candy's body. It was about 7 miles from her home. Over the years, they were never able to find a viable suspect, even though there was thousands of tips. With no way of knowing the future of trace evidence, the police decided to save a DNA sample that was found on Candace's body in evidence. Throughout the years, Candace's case turned cold, and that DNA sample remained in evidence. Finally, in early 2021, 62 years later, lab experts ran that DNA sample against the genealogy database. This alerted them to a possible match of 3 brothers. Of the 3 men, only one of them, John Hoff, had a child, and in 1970, Hoff actually died by suicide. Investigators contacted John's daughter, who gave her own DNA sample. This would then lead investigators to exhume Hoff's body and test his DNA against the DNA that was collected at the crime scene. Once John's DNA was tested, it was a match, and it turned out 62 years later, they were able to find Candace's killer. At the time, John was just 20 years old. He was serving in the U.S. Army and was stationed at a missile site just 1 mile from Candace's home. Luckily, they were able to find Candace's killer. Although it was 62 years later, you can always count on DNA evidence. And that is the case of Candace Rogers. Welcome back to Fresh Baked Crimes. Today we are talking about an unsolved murder in German history that happened in 1922 on a farm that was owned by the Gruber family. There was a husband and wife with their adult daughter and her 2 children, as well as a maid living on this farm. However, in April of 1922, every member who lived on this farm would be killed, and it would never be solved. The Grubers had a previous maid who had quit 6 months prior due to the fact that she believed that the farm was haunted. She had a constant feeling of being watched and always heard footsteps in the attic. Days leading up to the murders, the family had been noticing strange things at the farm, such as footsteps heading towards the farm but never coming back out, a newspaper that nobody remembered buying, and even keys disappearing. It took some time for the townspeople to realize that the Grubers had been murdered. Once the family had been found a few days later at their farm, it was noticed that their farm animals and their dog had not been harmed and in fact had even been fed and tended to in the days between the murders and their discovery. Smoke had been seen coming from the chimney in those days as well, and this suggests that the murderer had been staying at the farm until they were discovered. There were multiple leads, but they were all cleared. It was noted that the murderer had to be someone familiar with farm work, as they maintained the farm for days after the murders. It was also suspected that it could have been someone with a grudge against the family. Unfortunately, the case went cold, and the farm was demolished a year later. There are multiple theories about what actually happened at the farm. I believe the murderer was living in the house before and after the family was killed. Unfortunately, we'll never know the truth of what actually happened at the farm. And that is the unsolved case of the Gruber family. Welcome back to Fresh Baked Crimes. Today we're talking about the case of Tristan Bailey. Tristan was just 13 years old when her body was found on Mother's Day of May 9th, 2021. It turns out that she was stabbed 114 times. Tristan's mom reported her missing that morning, but little did she know what actually happened to her daughter the night before. Tristan met up with a boy named Aiden, and they went to their friend's house at about 12:30 a.m. The two ended up leaving a little after 1 a.m. This is when Aiden, who's 14 years old, would go on and murder Tristan. Aiden's friends even mentioned that Aiden had said multiple times that he wanted to stab someone. He felt absolutely no remorse for what he had just done. He was even taking pictures in the back of a cop car and even saying, "Has anybody seen Tristan lately?" 14-year-old Aiden would go on to be charged as an adult with first-degree murder. Aiden's mother, Crystal, was also charged in connection with the case because she was washing blood off of Aiden's jeans when he returned home that morning. As of right now, Aiden's trial is not to start until fall of 2022. However, if convicted, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. That is the case of Tristan Bailey. Welcome back to Fresh Baked Crimes. Today we are talking about the Sauter children, who vanished after their West Virginia home went up in flames in 1945. The Sauter family included George, Jenny, and their 10 children. The family went to bed on Christmas Eve when Jenny, the mom, woke up at about 1:30 to the house engulfed in smoke. Jenny and her husband were able to get some of the children out of the house, while the other 5 were trapped inside. The fire department had been called, but they didn't get there until 8 a.m. A police inspector said the cause of the fire was faulty wiring, and it was also noted that no remains were found among the ashes. A crematorium worker said that bones remain even after bodies are burnt at 2,000 degrees for 2 hours. However, the Sauter home only took 45 minutes to burn to the ground. In 1949, a tiny human vertebrae was found in the mix, but there was no sign of fire damage to it. However, there were some weird events in the months leading up to the fire. An angry insurance salesman told George that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed. The night of the fire, Jenny got woken up twice. First at 12:30 when her phone rang and she could hear a man's voice as well as glass clanging in the background. The second time, she heard a loud bang and a rolling noise on the roof. The morning of the fire, George's ladder was missing and both of his trucks wouldn't start. The Sauter family contacted the FBI, but nothing came of it. They spent the rest of their lives searching for their children, and to this day, we still have no idea where the Sauter children went.